The morning sky over Dubai was soft and golden, the kind of light that made travelers pause for a moment before boarding their flights. Inside the airport, among hundreds of rushing passengers, a quiet woman in her late 20s moved with calm steps. She wore a plain jacket, carried no expensive bag, and spoke to no one. To most eyes, she was just another traveler, another seat number on the passenger list. Her flight to London was a routine one, a long stretch of blue skies and clouds ahead. People boarded in small groups, some still half asleep, others already scrolling through their phones. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. The woman found her seat near the middle by the window and smiled faintly at the clouds waiting outside. She didn't speak much, just nodded politely when the person beside her greeted her. Then she placed her small notebook on her lap and looked out again. The engines hummed alive, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the crew began their safety demonstration. Most passengers ignored it, but not her. Her eyes quietly followed every move. The seatbelt sign, the emergency exits, the oxygen masks, she seemed to know it all by heart, like someone who had once lived this life before. When the plane climbed through the thin layer of clouds, she relaxed. The world below turned into a blur of white and gold. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and confident, telling everyone they'd reach London in about 7 hours. Everything felt ordinary, everything seemed fine. Halfway through the flight, turbulence hit. At first it was gentle, the kind that made drinks ripple in their cups, but soon it grew stronger. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and the captain's voice returned, a little less calm this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are experiencing some unexpected turbulence." The passengers obeyed. Some laughed nervously. Others clutched the armrests, but she stayed still, eyes watching the wings from her window. The engines didn't sound right to her trained ears. The pitch had changed, a small irregular vibration that most would never notice. Her fingers pressed slightly on her notebook. The years of silence she had kept since leaving her old life began to stir. Suddenly a sharp jolt shook the aircraft. Luggage tumbled from the overhead bins. A child began to cry. The flight attendant struggled to move through the aisle. And then, the sound that froze every heart on board, a loud bang followed by silence. One engine had failed. The cabin lights flickered. The plane dipped slightly before stabilizing again. Panic rippled through the rows. The captain's voice came again, strained this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're handling a technical issue." But his voice betrayed the truth. There was fear in it. She unbuckled her seatbelt slightly and looked around. Her calmness was unsettling to those near her. The man beside her whispered, "What's happening?" She replied softly, "One engine's gone. But we're still flying, don't worry yet." Her tone was firm, not comforting but steady in the cockpit. The two pilots were struggling with warnings flashing across their screens. Altitude dropping slowly, pressure warnings, one hydraulic line failing. They called the control tower, voices fast and anxious, trying to manage what training had never truly prepared them for. Inside the cabin, the air felt heavy. Some prayed under their breath, some cried quietly. The woman watched the crew rushing down the aisle, whispering between themselves. She noticed something else. The flight attendant's eyes kept darting toward the cockpit. Something was wrong beyond just an engine failure. Then it happened. The door to the cockpit opened slightly. One of the pilots came out, pale and sweating. He exchanged hurried words with the head attendant, and for a moment their eyes met with hers. That brief moment was enough. He froze for half a second, recognition flashing in his eyes. She turned her gaze back to the window, pretending she hadn't noticed. But the truth was out. He knew who she was. And more than that, he knew what she used to be. The passengers didn't notice this silent exchange, but the tension in the air changed. The turbulence grew worse, oxygen masks dropped from above, and the plane tilted slightly to one side. Screams filled the cabin. The captain's voice cracked through the speakers again. "We are declaring an emergency, please stay calm." But calm was gone. People were panicking. The woman took a slow breath, her hands trembling only for a moment. Then she whispered something only she could hear. "Not again. But maybe this time I can fix it." She stood up against the chaos, ignoring the yelling around her. The flight attendant shouted, "Ma'am, please sit down." But when she spoke, her voice was sharp, clear and commanding. "I need to talk to your captain now." The attendant hesitated. Her training said to follow orders, but something about this passenger's tone broke through the noise of fear. Within seconds, she was led toward the cockpit. Every eye followed her, no one knowing that this quiet woman, this supposed ordinary passenger, was walking back into a world she had promised herself she'd left behind forever. As the cockpit door closed behind her, the sound of alarms echoed inside, and the pilots, still struggling with the controls, looked up in disbelief when they saw her step in. One of them whispered her name softly, disbelief in his eyes, and for the first time in years, she placed her hand on the control yoke, eyes focused, heart steady, saying quietly, "Let's bring them home." Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed from every direction. The pilot in command, Captain Idris, was drenched in sweat, his hands gripping the control column tightly, while his co-pilot struggled to silence warning lights. Altitude was dropping faster than they liked, and communication with ground control was cutting in and out. Then, in the middle of chaos, the door opened and she stepped in, calm but with eyes that carried memory. Sharp, trained and steady, the captain froze, his mind catching up with her face. "You," he whispered. The co-pilot turned, confused. "Who is she?" The woman ignored the question, slid into the jump seat, and scanned the control panel with one quick sweep. Her fingers moved like they had done this 1,000 times. "Engine 2 is gone," she said evenly, "and your right hydraulic system is losing pressure. That's why you're fighting the roll. Give me your headset." Captain Idris hesitated. "You're not cleared," he began, but she cut him off. "You don't have time to argue, Captain. Give me the headset." The tone wasn't a plea, it was an order, the kind only a professional could give. Reluctantly, he handed it over, and she placed it over her ears. Her voice changed when she spoke into the radio, calm but firm. "Control, this is Flight 739. Mayday, mayday. One engine down. Loss of hydraulics on right system. Requesting emergency descent route." The air traffic controller on the other side paused. "Who am I speaking with?" She didn't answer that part. "This is secondary command. We're stabilizing," she said instead, down in the cabin. Passengers clung to their seats as the plane jolted again. Drinks spilled, bags rolled across the aisle, but gradually something shifted. The violent shaking began to ease. The plane's tilt corrected slightly. The loud alarms quieted one by one. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. The co-pilot stared at her hands, watching her adjust switches, override controls, and recalibrate stabilizers like someone who knew every hidden part of the aircraft. "You've flown this model before," he said under his breath. She didn't look up. "I've flown worse," she replied. The captain leaned closer. "You left the service years ago, didn't you? After that rescue mission in the North Sea?" She didn't respond, but the silence was an answer in itself. He sighed heavily, realizing fate had placed an old ghost in his cockpit, one that might just save them all. Minutes passed, though, to everyone on board. It felt like hours. The oxygen mask still dangled from the ceiling, the cabin filled with whispers of prayers. The flight attendants did their best to calm people. "Everything's under control," one said. Though even she didn't believe it inside the cockpit, the woman was focused on the horizon. "We've got crosswinds at 12,000 feet. If we descend too fast, we'll lose lift," she said, her voice sharp but steady. The captain nodded. "We can't risk a full glide, we're too heavy." "Then dump fuel," she said. "You'll need a lighter body to keep the nose steady." He looked hesitant. "That'll limit range." "We're not aiming for range," she said coldly. "We're aiming for survival." For the first time since the failure, the plane began responding like it should. The passengers didn't know who had taken over, only that something had changed. Somewhere in row 14, an old man whispered, "Whoever's flying this plane now, God bless them." The woman adjusted her mic again. "Control, we're declaring full emergency. Prepare strip for emergency landing. Nearest viable runway." There was a pause, then a reply. "Copy that. We're clearing runway 07 at Muscat International. Weather is stable. Emergency crews are on standby." Her heart thudded once, steadying itself. "Roger that." "Muscat 07, she replied. The co-pilot glanced at her. "You sure we can make Muscat on one engine?" "If the wind holds, yes," she said. "If it doesn't, then we make our own luck." She reached for the manual trim wheel, adjusted pitch by instinct. "Level it out at 9,000 feet, she said. "Don't push it further, we'll hold altitude till the descent path clears." The captain followed her orders now without question. In that small, shaking space, leadership had shifted. She wasn't supposed to be there, but right now she was their only hope. Down below, through the cockpit glass, the faint curve of the sea began to appear. Shimmering in sunlight, she blinked once, remembering another time, another sky, another rescue mission gone wrong, when she was the only one left to land. That memory hurt, but it gave her strength. Then came another problem. The remaining engine flickered briefly, a sound no pilot ever wants to hear. The co-pilot's hand shot toward the throttle. "It's surging," he said. "Keep it steady." She snapped, "Do not overcompensate." Her hands moved over the controls, feeding in just enough power to stabilize thrust. The noise evened out, a low hum returning. "There," she said softly. "Don't fight it. Guide it." Captain Idris exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. "You still remember how to talk to the machines," he said quietly. She gave a faint half smile. "They remember me too." Outside, the sky cleared. The ocean stretched endlessly below them, and for the first time since the failure, hope filled the cabin again. The passengers didn't know her name, didn't know her past, but if they had looked through the tiny glass window separating them from the cockpit, they would have seen something unforgettable. A woman who was supposed to be just a passenger, now guiding two trained pilots through one of the most dangerous situations a plane could face, calm, precise, and unshakable, as if the sky itself had been waiting for her return. And though no one knew it yet, the hardest part was still to come. The cabin lights flickered once more, casting shadows over worried faces. Fear had settled into the passengers like a cold mist, some still clutching hands, others whispering prayers. But near the front of the aircraft, just behind the cockpit door, silence had turned into something else, control. The kind of control that came from experience. Instinct and courage mixed with old scars. She leaned forward in the jump seat, eyes locked on the flight instruments, every number and blinking light reflecting in her pupils. "We've got partial power back," the co-pilot said, voice trembling slightly. "But hydraulics are still unstable." She nodded once. "Keep manual pressure steady on the left rudder. Let the auto trim take what it can," she replied calmly. Her tone didn't just steady the pilots. It seemed to settle the air itself. Captain Idris, hands shaking, wiped sweat from his brow. "We've sent a distress code," he said. "They're expecting us in Muscat. Emergency landing teams are on standby." She didn't look at him, just murmured, "If we reach Muscat." The silence after that sentence was heavy. Below them, clouds drifted apart, revealing the sea glinting like broken glass. The plane was gliding lower now, altitude slowly decreasing but under her control. For the first time since takeoff, the aircraft felt guided, not falling, not fighting but moving with purpose. Then, a small alarm blinked red again. She frowned. "Fuel imbalance," she muttered. "Right tank's bleeding faster than the left." The co-pilot checked. "That's impossible, we sealed it." "Check again," she ordered sharply. He did and froze. "Pressure leak in auxiliary line. Cut flow from the aux line," she said. "We can't risk ignition on the weak side." The captain hesitated. "That'll cost us flight time." "So will exploding," she said simply, and flicked the switch herself. The cockpit went quiet again, the hum of the remaining engine the only sound between them. Down in the cabin, a child started crying loudly, and a woman tried to comfort him. "It's okay, sweetheart." "It's just a little shake," she whispered, though her own voice trembled. A flight attendant passed by, forcing a brave smile. "Everything's under control," she said softly. Her voice cracked at the end. But hope had a way of surviving even inside lies. Back inside the cockpit, she glanced out the front window. The horizon was clearer now, but the path ahead was uncertain. "We'll hit headwinds near Oman's coast," she said. "We'll have to glide through turbulence at descent. Can the gear handle a hard landing?" The captain sighed. "If we keep it slow, maybe, but steering will be tough." "Then we land with wind, not against it," she said. "Angle approach to runway 07 with tailwind assist. Manual brakes on touchdown." The co-pilot blinked. "That's risky." "Everything about this is risky," she said dryly, then added, "But it's better than falling into the ocean." A pause followed, filled only with the faint crackle of the radio. Then a voice broke through. "Flight 739, this is Muscat Tower. We're tracking your descent. Confirm one engine operational?" She replied instantly. "Affirmative, one engine. Hydraulics at 40%. Fuel line isolated. Initiating descent to 9,000 feet. Copy that. 739. Wind at 10 knots east, visibility clear. Emergency strip prepared." Captain Idris looked at her again. A flicker of gratitude mixed with disbelief. How long's it been since you flew? She smiled faintly, eyes still on the instruments. Long enough to forget the noise, not long enough to forget the feel. For a few minutes, none of them spoke. The world outside was silent too, only the ocean stretching endlessly beneath. The sun dipped slightly, turning the clouds golden pink. It looked peaceful from afar, but inside the cockpit every second was survival. Then, the turbulence hit again, harder this time. The entire plane rattled. Overhead bins shaking, passengers gasping. Altitude drop, 8,000 and falling. The co-pilot shouted, "Stabilize with trim," she yelled. "Don't fight the wind, let it roll, then pull." Her hands moved fast, gripping the yoke beside the captain. Together they corrected the angle, metal groaned, and the plane steadied again for a moment. It felt like the world held its breath. The passengers froze mid-prayer. The attendants stopped in their tracks, and then the shaking stopped. The aircraft leveled out. Flying straight once again, Captain Idris exhaled, a weak laugh escaping him. "You really can still fly," he said. She didn't answer, her gaze distant, lost somewhere between clouds and memory. Then softly she said, "I don't fly anymore, Captain. I just make sure others get to land." The co-pilot looked at her curiously. "You were military, weren't you?" She gave a small nod. "Once, a long time ago. Before things went wrong." She didn't explain what wrong meant, but the silence around her told its own story. Down in the cabin, passengers began to notice the calm. The flight attendants whispered updates. "We're approaching Muscat. Please stay seated." A murmur of relief rippled through the rows, but not everyone trusted it yet. Some eyes stayed glued to the window, searching the clouds for signs of the ground. Back in the cockpit, she stared ahead, the airport still invisible in the haze. 10 minutes to visual, she said quietly. Captain Idris nodded. 10 minutes. Then he looked at her. "If we make it down safe, you'll stay after landing, right? The authorities will want to know how a passenger landed a plane." She gave a faint, tired smile. "If we make it down safe, Captain, they can call me whatever they want." Outside, faint lights began to appear through the thin clouds. Runway lights glowing like stars guiding them home. And as she tightened her grip on the controls, the cabin lights flickered once again. A reminder that the sky wasn't done testing them yet. The hardest landing of her life was waiting just ahead. The horizon glowed faintly ahead. Muscat was close, but the sky didn't feel safe yet. The aircraft shuddered again, small tremors rippling through the fuselage as if it too was holding its breath. The woman's eyes flicked across the instruments. Her hands steady on the controls. Altitude steady at 9,000. Airspeed 250, the co-pilot said. "We're still losing pressure in the right system." She nodded slightly. "That's fine, keep manual override. Let's not rely on what's breaking." Captain Idris took a long breath, trying to calm the storm inside his chest. He had seen skilled pilots lose control for far less. But this woman, this supposed passenger, was unshakable. Every time the aircraft protested, she corrected it before it turned dangerous. There was something hauntingly precise about her movements, the kind that comes from someone who has flown through worse skies. Down in the cabin, people were starting to whisper again. The crying had stopped. The panic had softened into uneasy silence. The attendants had shared the news that they were approaching Muscat, and the passengers held on to that hope like a lifeline. One older woman quietly clutched a small pendant, whispering prayers for whoever was flying the plane, not knowing that the one saving them wasn't supposed to be there at all. The woman in the cockpit leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the radar. "Crosswinds ahead," she muttered. "We'll hit them before visual. Keep the nose steady." "Not stiff," the co-pilot swallowed. "Got it." He followed her commands like a student to a teacher. Every order she gave seemed to make the aircraft obey. "Muscat Tower to Flight 739, confirm status," came the radio voice again. She pressed the button. "Flight 739, one engine operative, descent stabilized. Preparing final approach." The reply was immediate. "Runway 07 is clear, winds 12 knots east." "Ground teams are ready," she responded softly. "Copy that." 739 ready for descent." Captain Idris looked at her, voice low. "You're doing what 2 pilots couldn't manage. Mind telling me how long you've been hiding this?" She gave a faint smile. "Since the day I promised myself I'd never fly again." He frowned. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze locked on the sky ahead. After a pause, she said quietly, "Because the last time I did, not everyone made it home. Silence filled the cockpit. The co-pilot exchanged a glance with the captain but said nothing. They could see the pain behind her calm. See the pain behind her calm, the memory she carried like invisible luggage. Suddenly the aircraft jolted again. A harder shake this time. A loud beep filled the cockpit. Another warning. Left spoiler jammed. The co-pilot shouted, "It's stuck mid-angle." "Don't touch it," she said sharply. "We can work around it." Roll trim left 2 degrees in balance with rudder pressure. The co-pilot obeyed instantly, hands trembling as he followed her lead. "Now ease the yoke, don't fight it, feel it," she instructed, guiding his motion with her own hand over his. The plane steadied again, wobbling but holding course. Captain Idris exhaled slowly. "You still have that pilot touch," he murmured. She looked at him briefly. "You never forget something that almost killed you." Down below, the passengers felt the turbulence calm. They looked at each other, unsure if the danger had passed or if the quiet was just a break before the storm. One little girl whispered to her mother, "Mommy, did we stop falling?" The mother nodded, though she didn't know the answer herself. In the cockpit, the runway lights began to flicker faintly in the distance. "There," she said softly. "Visual on 07. Captain Idris leaned forward, squinting through the haze. "I see it," he said. "Altitude 6,000. Reducing speed." "Good, keep it steady," she said. "We'll take a long approach to avoid sudden descent pressure." The co-pilot frowned. "But with one engine, we'll lose thrust." "That's the point," she said. "We glide, not drop." The cockpit was silent except for the steady hum of the remaining engine, the rhythmic beeping of instruments, and the faint tremor in the metal skin of the plane. Then the radio cracked again. "Flight 739, you are clear for emergency landing." "Ground crew's ready," she replied. "Copy." 739 on final approach. Captain Idris looked at her once more, eyes filled with something beyond gratitude, something like awe. "You could have stayed in your seat. You could have prayed with the rest of them. Why did you come here?" She took a slow breath, her hands firm on the controls. "Because sometimes, when the sky tests you twice, you don't wait for someone else to save you," she said quietly. "You just do what you know how to do." As the aircraft descended, the runway lights grew brighter, golden lines cutting through the night haze. The wind started to buffet the wings again, gentle at first, then harder. Crosswind gusts. 15 knots, the co-pilot said nervously. "Compensate manually," she ordered. "Small inputs, not big ones." The plane tilted slightly. Nose down, the engine groaning under the effort. Alarms flickered briefly, but her voice remained calm. "Hold the glide, let her breathe. She'll follow your hands if you stop fighting her." The co-pilot stared at her, amazed. It wasn't just skill, it was something deeper, something emotional. Like the aircraft itself trusted her. The captain adjusted flaps on her signal. "Flaps 15, gear down," she called. The deep thud of landing gear echoed beneath them, down in the cabin. The landing gear sound sparked a new wave of hope. People clutched hands tighter, whispered thanks, and looked toward the windows. The city lights below looked like a promise that they might actually make it home. In the cockpit, her jaw clenched slightly, eyes narrowing. "Wind shift coming," she said. "Brace the left side. Keep her nose aligned." The captain and co-pilot followed her rhythm, every movement smooth, synchronized, almost rehearsed. And as the wheels touched the first hint of air from the runway path, she whispered under her breath, not to the crew, not to anyone else, but to the sky itself. "Not this time. We're landing." But the ground wasn't ready to let them go so easily. The wheels touched the first layer of air above the runway, trembling under the weight of the aircraft. The smell of heated metal filled the cockpit, the sound of the single surviving engine roaring in protest. "Speed 220 and dropping," the co-pilot said, voice tight. "Flaps at full. Gear confirmed down." The woman's eyes stayed locked on the runway lights that gleamed like a golden path through the darkness. "Good, don't chase the lights," she said calmly. "Let them come to you." The turbulence hit again, this time sharper. Wind slammed into the right side of the plane, the wings tilting dangerously. The entire cabin gasped as the aircraft dipped, one wing nearly grazing invisible air currents. "Crosswind spike 20 knots," the co-pilot shouted. "Counter with rudder," she ordered sharply. Her hands moved fast, gripping the yoke alongside the captain, guiding it left, easing pressure before it could spiral. The plane steadied, bouncing slightly but holding line. Down in the cabin, chaos and silence existed together. Children cried softly while adults stared at each other with wide, helpless eyes. A woman clutched her husband's hand so tightly their knuckles turned white. The passengers could feel every move, every jolt, every vibration of the aircraft fighting gravity. The attendants shouted over the noise, "Heads down! Stay seated!" The cockpit was pure focus. Sweat trickled down Captain Idris's temple. "Wind's changing direction again," he said. "We'll overshoot if we keep this speed." "No," she said firmly. "You'll lose control if you pull too much. Keep descent rate steady. Reduce thrust gradually." He followed her command without hesitation. Her voice cut through panic like a steady rhythm, almost like music for the machine. "Altitude 1,000 feet, the co-pilot said. "Runway in full visual." "Copy," she said softly. "Stay calm, we're nearly there." Her tone didn't waver, but her hands were firm. She had done this before, landed machines that refused to cooperate. But this time it wasn't part of duty. It was life itself hanging on her balance. The radio crackled again. "Flight 739. Wind shear alert near runway threshold. Repeat. Wind shear at threshold." She pressed the mic button. "Copy, Muscat Tower. We're committed. We cannot go around." "Understood. Emergency crews are standing by," came the final reply. The words "we're committed" carried weight. There was no second chance now. One wrong angle and they wouldn't make it. The passengers didn't know it, but the cockpit crew did. Every decision from this point was final, irreversible. The runway lights grew larger, brighter, stretching toward them like a lifeline. "Speed 170, she said. "Flare gently at 100 feet, the captain nodded. "Understood." His hands mirrored hers now. "Steady, responsive, trusting, 50 feet, she said under her breath. The engine roared one last time. 30, 20, 10. The wheels slammed onto the runway with a deep metallic thud. The aircraft bounced once, then again, before gripping the tarmac. Screams filled the cabin as smoke burst from under the wings. Tires screeched against asphalt, and the cabin rattled violently. "Reverse thrust, manual only," she commanded. Captain Idris pulled hard. The engine groaned but obeyed. The speed began to drop. 200, 150, 120. The runway lights blurred past like streaks of gold. The entire structure of the plane vibrated as if it were exhaling all the tension it had carried. Then silence. The plane rolled to a slow crawl, its wheels grinding softly against the ground. The alarms stopped one by one. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air. For the first time in hours, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the dying engine cooling down. Inside the cockpit, Captain Idris let out a shaking breath. Leaning back in disbelief, the co-pilot covered his face, whispering something like a prayer, and she just sat there, staring out through the windshield at the shimmering lights of the runway. Her hands were still gripping the yoke, trembling now, but she didn't let go. Not yet. Down the aisle, a small cheer broke out. Hesitant at first, then growing louder. Passengers were crying, hugging, whispering thanks. Some shouted, "We're safe." Over and over, the flight attendants collapsed into their seats, tears streaming down their faces. Captain Idris turned toward her, voice rough. "You just saved 231 lives." She finally looked at him, her eyes tired but steady. "No," she said quietly. "We all did." Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, red and white lights flashing through the cockpit glass. Crews rushed to inspect the tires, the landing gear. The engine still smoking faintly. One firefighter looked up toward the cockpit and froze when he saw her through the glass. His lips moved as if he recognized her. The captain noticed. "You're known," he said softly. She gave a small, humorless smile. "Not anymore." She unbuckled her harness slowly. Standing up for the first time since the crisis began, her knees felt weak, her arms heavy. But there was no pride in her face, only quiet relief, and something deeper, like unfinished grief. As she walked out of the cockpit, the passengers turned to look at her. Some clapped through tears, some simply stared in silence, trying to understand how one woman had done what even their pilots had struggled to do. She didn't stop to take their praise, she just nodded once, moving down the aisle toward the emergency exit. Every step echoed with memories, another landing, years ago, where the ending hadn't been this kind. When she stepped out onto the metal stairs, the warm night air hit her face. Flashing lights and emergency crews surrounded her. But she didn't look back at the plane. Her eyes went to the sky instead. The same sky that had almost taken everything again. Captain Idris called after her from the doorway. "You never told me your name." She turned slightly, her face half lit by the blinking runway lights. "That's not important," she said softly. What matters is we made it, and with that, she disappeared into the crowd of rescuers and flashing lights just as quietly as she had appeared. But her name, the one the captain had whispered when she entered the cockpit, would soon echo across the world again. Because heroes don't stay hidden forever. The night outside the airport was thick with humidity, and the smell of jet fuel still lingered in the air. The runway, now calm after chaos, was crowded with flashing lights, emergency crews, and media vans gathering at the edges like moths drawn to a flame. The passengers were being escorted out one by one, their legs trembling, their eyes wet with disbelief. Yet amidst all the noise, one thing remained the same. She was gone. Captain Idris stood near the ambulance line, his uniform stained with sweat and soot. He looked around, searching the sea of faces for the woman who had just landed his plane. She left? The co-pilot said softly. One of the ground staff said she walked toward the hangars. Idris nodded slowly, a quiet frustration mixing with respect. Of course she did, he murmured in the control tower. Air traffic officers were still replaying the radio transmission, the woman's calm voice cutting through static, giving commands, saving lives. One of the technicians muttered. She sounded like a pro. Not a passenger, another replied. She wasn't just a pro, whoever she was. She knew that aircraft better than anyone. Meanwhile, outside the airport perimeter, she sat alone on a bench under a flickering light, her jacket folded beside her, her hand still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. For hours she had been a pilot again, not by choice but by necessity, and now that the silence had returned, so had the weight of her past. Her phone buzzed, a message lighting up the cracked screen. You broke your promise again. She stared at it for a long moment, her jaw tightening. Then she turned the phone off. Back at the terminal, news crews were already reporting live. An emergency landing at Muscat International tonight turned into a miracle. As a passenger took control after both pilots lost partial control of the aircraft, one reporter said breathlessly, "We're still waiting to identify the woman responsible, but eyewitnesses describe her as calm, focused, and highly skilled." Inside the medical tent, passengers gave their statements. "She just stood up like she belonged in that cockpit," said one man, still wrapped in a blanket. "The pilots, they actually stepped aside for her," another added. "When we hit the runway, I thought it was over." But she never flinched, not once. Captain Idris watched the reporters with weary eyes. The authorities had already asked for a written report, and he had told them the truth, that she wasn't just a passenger, that she had saved them all. But he had also left one thing out. Her name. He wasn't sure if it was loyalty or instinct, but he felt she didn't want to be found. A few hours later, in a quiet part of the airport, he found her. She was sitting near the maintenance hangar, watching the distant lights of rescue vehicles fade one by one. He approached slowly. "You didn't wait for debriefing," he said gently. She didn't turn. "They don't need me for that." "They'll want to thank you," he said. She shook her head. "They'll want answers, and I don't have any that make sense." He sat down beside her. "You could have let me finish the landing, you know." She gave a faint smile. "You would have made it, maybe." He chuckled. "No, we wouldn't have, not with that hydraulic failure." A long silence followed. Then he said softly, "You're ex-military, aren't you?" She nodded slowly. "I used to be search and recovery pilot." Her voice was distant. "We were trained to fly through anything, but that kind of training costs more than it gives." He studied her face. "Something happened, didn't it?" She didn't answer right away. "North Sea," she said finally. 2 years ago, storm mission, engine failure. We landed on water. I was the only one who made it out." Her hands clenched slightly. "After that, I swore I'd never touch a control again." Idris looked at her with quiet respect. "You kept that promise. Until tonight." She nodded faintly. "Until the sky didn't give me a choice." For a while, they sat in silence, the distant hum of airport activity filling the night. Then he said, "The authorities will find you. The press already knows you exist." She exhaled slowly. "Let them talk. The world loves heroes when it's convenient." Her tone softened. "But heroes are just people who didn't have anyone else to call." The captain smiled faintly. "Maybe so, but tonight you were more than that." She finally turned to face him, her eyes calm but tired. "No, Captain. I was just a passenger who couldn't stay in her seat." The first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Planes were taking off again as if nothing had happened. The world was already moving forward, forgetting the near tragedy that had unfolded only hours ago. She stood up, slinging her small bag over her shoulder. "You should rest," she said quietly. "You'll have questions to answer soon." He nodded. "So will you." "I won't be here when they come," she replied. Her voice was soft but certain. He didn't try to stop her. He just asked one last question. "If you leave now, where will you go?" She looked toward the sunrise. "Somewhere the sky doesn't remember me," she said simply. Then, without another word, she walked away, disappearing into the soft orange light, her shadow fading between the hangars. And as the captain watched her go, he couldn't help but think. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who walk away quietly, leaving behind nothing but a miracle and a mystery. By sunrise, news of the mystery passenger pilot had spread across every major network. TV screens inside the airport showed looping footage of the aircraft resting on the runway, smoke still curling from its tired engine. Headlines read, "Unidentified woman saves 231 lives midair," and "Passenger takes control during crisis, an unbelievable act of bravery." Inside the terminal, passengers who had survived the flight were being interviewed, faces pale but grateful. "She didn't panic," one man said, his voice trembling, when everyone screamed. "She just stood up like she knew what to do. She walked straight to the cockpit, and the next thing we knew, the shaking stopped," another woman added, tears in her eyes. "She never said who she was, not even after landing. She just left quietly." Captain Idris sat alone in the debriefing room, staring at the report form in front of him. The officials wanted names, explanations, records, but he had written none, just one line in calm handwriting. "Emergency intervention by passenger. Identity unknown. Aircraft landed safely." He knew that wasn't the full story, but somehow it was enough. Outside the airport fence, beyond the flashing lights and reporters, she stood at a small roadside cafe, sipping bitter tea. Her hand still shook slightly. Though her face betrayed no emotion, her jacket was now zipped high. Her cap pulled low, just another traveler blending into the morning crowd. A small television inside the cafe showed a replay of her voice on the radio, the recording already leaked by the control tower. Her calm tone filled the air. "Flight 739, one engine down, stabilizing. Request emergency descent." The cafe owner turned to her, shaking his head in disbelief. "Can you imagine? A passenger flying a jet like that?" He said, "That's what real courage looks like." She smiled faintly. "Yes, courage," she murmured almost to herself. "Or maybe unfinished duty." Her phone buzzed again. Another message lighting the cracked screen. "You can't keep running forever. The agency knows." She stared at it, the words sinking deep. Then she deleted the message, dropped the phone into her tea, and watched it sink, bubbles rising to the surface like the ghosts of her past. Back at the airport, a black SUV arrived near the runway where the damaged aircraft was being towed. Two men in formal uniforms stepped out. Their badges didn't belong to the airline. They were from the Air Security Bureau. "We've identified her," one said quietly. "Former search and recovery pilot, codename Vega, officially declared inactive after North Sea operation 3 years ago." The other man frowned. "Inactive? She just saved over 200 lives." "Yes," the first replied. "But she wasn't supposed to fly again." Captain Idris overheard part of their conversation as he stepped outside. "You're looking for her, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes," one of them said. "She's a national asset, but she went off-grid. Her file's been sealed." The captain crossed his arms. "Maybe you should let her stay that way." The man gave a faint smile. "You know we can't. People like her don't disappear forever. They just wait for the next storm." Meanwhile, miles away, the woman walked along a quiet coastal road, her boots leaving faint prints in the sand beside the sea. The air was heavy with salt, and the ocean moved with the slow rhythm of memory. She had landed hundreds of planes in her past life. Some safely, some not, but this one had felt different. Not a mission, not an order, just a moment where fate demanded she rise again. She stopped and looked toward the horizon. The same sun that had watched her flight now rose before her, painting the sky gold for the first time in years. She smiled, not out of pride but peace. The storm inside her had quieted, at least for now. A small boy nearby was flying a paper plane running barefoot across the sand. The wind caught it and sent it soaring higher than he expected. Then it looped suddenly and dived toward her, landing softly by her feet. She bent down, picked it up, and smiled at the boy. "Good throw," she said gently. Handing it back, the boy grinned. "One day, I'll fly a real one." She paused, looking into his bright, fearless eyes. "Then promise me one thing," she said, "when the sky turns against you, don't fight it, listen to it." He nodded seriously, not understanding her words but feeling their weight. As he ran off again, she looked at the paper plane still gliding through the air and whispered, "The sky always remembers." By afternoon, the news cycle had already moved on to other stories. The headlines faded, the footage replayed one last time, and the world continued as if the miracle in the sky had been just another passing headline. But somewhere out there, in the quiet edge of a small coastal town, a woman who once promised never to fly again sat watching seagulls trace lines in the wind. Her eyes calm and distant, Captain Idris would never see her again. But sometimes, when he flew at dawn, he swore he could hear her voice echo through his headset. Steady, calm, fearless, saying, "Let her breathe. Don't fight her." And in those moments he realized something profound. Some people are meant to fly not because it's their job, but because the sky itself refuses to let them go. So while the world may never know her name, her story would live in every pilot's heart, whispered across radio channels whenever the clouds grew dark. The same line she had spoken before taking control. "Not again. But maybe this time I can fix it." And she did, because sometimes a hero doesn't need wings to fly, just the courage to rise when everyone else falls.